everyone. Thank you so much for being here. My name is Rebekah Meola. I'm really excited to host this conversation with Antoinette Godin about Native Los Angeles in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. I am going to cheat and look at my notes here. So a fascinating time, really exciting time in Native America as well as America. The 80s really came in on the tail of the 60s and 70s, which were some of the most radical, dynamic times in American history. So Antoinette here, she wrote this novel, Native Brushstrokes, and it is her first novel. And it follows the life of a young Native artist named Cordy Lenoir. And it's set in 1980s Santa Monica. And since those eras are so closely tied together, and since many of us have a connection to Los Angeles, if nothing else than just by proximity, Antoinette has agreed to come, and since she's lived there in those eras, to tell us a little bit about Native LA in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. As I mentioned, it was a bit of a radical time. Some of these topics may be viewed as controversial, but we hope that you will enjoy this eye-opening conversation. Thank you so much.
Before I get started, I would just like to share I came from 40-degree weather and rain, so it is absolutely wonderful to be in this climate. It is so warm, I can feel everything drying out, and I just love it. I just had to share that with everybody. Hello, my name is Antoinette, and I'm here to read to you and talk to you about my book, my debut novel, Twentynine Native Brushstrokes. But before I do that, I would like to thank the Twentynine Palms Book Fair, the committee that worked very hard to put this together. I would also like to say that this is in a fortuitous time. We are right now National Native American Month, so I feel very happy to be invited here. And also, I would like to pay homage to the Indian nations in this region. And I know there are a lot of natives here, and we're on Indian land, so I raise my hands to all of you. And thank you for allowing me to do this reading. And so what I would like to do is take you back in time to 1982. And my character is Cordy Lenoir, living in Santa Monica. And in Santa Monica at that time, there were no computers, there was no texting, there was no mail via email. There was just a very slow world, and everything you did face-to-face or through meeting with people. Nothing was done the way it is today on FaceTime. So it was a very, very different time, and rents at that time were only $300 a month, if you can imagine that. And I know people can't. And people had like little barbecues, and everybody, artists, struggling artists, people of a lower income were always living in Santa Monica. So I know that's really hard to imagine, but that's what the context in which this novel takes place. Now, what has happened with Cordy Lenoir, my protagonist, is she is in the middle of a lot of political activities going on in Los Angeles. And I don't know if people are familiar here with the American Indian movement, but it was a very sort of a radical Native movement that started in the shores of Minneapolis and went to the shores of Santa Monica. And there were a lot of leaders in that movement who I might say are no longer with us today, but they were very well known in the Indian world. So I would pay homage to Dennis Banks, who's no longer with us, and he is one of the founders of that group. Russell Means, who is an actor and also one of the founders of that group. John Trudell, a Native poet and speaker, And he is no longer with us today, unfortunately, but I might add he was with Marceline Bertrand, Angelina Jolie's mother for many, many years. Just a little side bit of trivia. I would like to, and he had a group called Bad Dogs and did a lot of pre-rap poetry reading in the local area at Venice Beach. And there were also the Belcourt brothers who were from Minnesota. And I might add that the group, and this may sound kind of shocking, but it was during the time of the activist of the Black Panthers of the 60s and 70s. And so what these groups really wanted to do is they wanted to raise up the poverty in their communities. That was their goal. And a lot of groups started getting in on that activism. So you had American Indian movements, you had the Italian Civil Rights League back east, which was based upon it. You had Cesar Chavez, the farm workers, who were fighting for farm workers' rights. And you had the Black Panthers, who we don't talk about much today, but they were very, very active. In this time period, oddly enough, you also have the Hoover era. J. Edgar Hoover died in the 70s. I don't know if many of you are familiar, but he was considered a spy master of the era. So a lot of people were really frightened in that time, thinking they were like going to be the victims of spies. So when you went to Native events, people were always looking around to see who was a spy. And so it was really scary. They'd say, oh my God, there was a lady that was a spy. Her name was Blue Dove, who hung out at powwows and groups, and they'd go, oh my God, there's Blue Dove. And people would know that was Blue Dove and that she was an undercover agent. So there was a really paranoid period at that time with political activism, as well as the various things going on with, spies in that era. So I might share with you, I had a friend who said, I think I'm being spied on. And I said, well, why don't you do a FOIA request? So he did, and he got like a 6-inch file of redacted text. And he said, but I only don't do anything. So people were just shocked that, this whole thing was going on with spies and that sort of thing in that era. And it's hard to imagine today, but that was happening. And then you had the intersection of that with Hollywood. And so you had a lot of Native actors that were still involved regardless of the pressure. And one of them was Marlon Brando. He went on all of the various walks, events, he spoke publicly. You had Muhammad Ali, who invited natives to his camps. You had Max Gale of the Barney Miller series, who had a teepee at his house in Malibu. So you had a lot of, David Carradine was very active and supportive of Native rights. And within all of this, all of the story that I've shared with you of what was going on in Los Angeles at this time, you had a love story. And it was a love story between a young Native activist and another male activist who was a Plains Indian. And so I call the story Wuthering Heights Meets Indian Country. That is the log line. And what I mean by that is you had a Byronic sort of hyper, kind of toxic, masculine male who wanted money more than anything to get ahead and would do anything to kind of get even with society, much like Heathcliff and Wuthering Heights. And so that is a theme that runs throughout the book. And my character is an artist, and she does a lot of really beautiful paintings, but they reflect Native America historically and currently at that time. And they reflect the Hoover era. They also reflect the boarding school era. So each painting that she does will reflect a time in history for our country and for women. And finally, I have a couple of themes that I think every book has a theme. For example, Wall Street's theme was greed is good. A Christmas Tale's theme was greed isn't good. And so some of the themes in my book that you'll find are make changes in your life before it's too late. Money is not everything. Love is the most important thing in the universe. And never give up, you can succeed. And with that, I will say miigwech, and thank you very much.
All right, thank you so much, Antoinette. Appreciate that presentation. So we're going to talk about a few things here. Antoinette and I have had the opportunity to have many conversations about her book, and one conversation about the characters leads to stories about LA in the 60s and the American Indian movement, and these are some stories I haven't heard a lot about, and so maybe some of you also haven't heard a little bit about them. I mean, can we just start with the American Indian movement? You said they started in Minneapolis and then came to Los Angeles, but then were actually really active in LA, and I think that actually became the hub for that activity. So maybe you can just inform us a little bit on that movement.
Yes, and thank you. And I know maybe a lot of you aren't familiar with the American Indian movement. I don't know, but I know I was, because my aunt was very active with Dennis Banks and the founders in Minneapolis. It started out as almost like, we'll say, basement group. And they were really upset with the discrimination and what was happening to natives. And let's just say this was pre-casino. There were no wealthy natives. Everybody was dirt poor. People would laugh about who had the messiest car or the poorest car, and laugh about if it made it across town, because everybody lived in extreme poverty. And so the Native American movement started there in the basements, and my aunt and all of them went to Switzerland and to the Geneva talks, and they talked about it. There was Dennis Banks, probably just sounds like a list, Russell Means, the Belcourt brothers, John Trudell was super active, and they started hitting Indian country kind of like, I would say, a wave. So it started in Minneapolis, and pretty soon they were popular all the way to San Francisco, and you had the Alcatraz takeover, and then you had all the way down to LA where you had the different performers, and then you had the longest walk, which was the last super native activity where they walked from LA to Washington, DC, and fighting for native rights. So it was a really different time than what we have today. And actually, I think really set some precedent for Indian country too.
And I think they also really helped set the stage for a lot of creativity in Native America, if I'm correct. And one of the things I really enjoy about your story being set in Los Angeles, because I am a former Angelino and I love LA, and one of the things I love most is all the different people that you meet. And so this was the same, of course, in Native America, and it really has to do with this relocation period, which brought natives into the cities. It was a US government program. And so maybe you could take it from there. Who was sort of, in LA in the 80s?
So post-relocation, everybody was a struggling actor. A lot of natives came to become stars. I knew different people who wanted to get the big parts. And everybody was struggling to get into a movie, even be an extra. A lot of the people that came were struggling to get into everything. So it did become an Indian Renaissance. There were writers, there were grips, there were anything that you can think about. And this was in Los Angeles. At the time, it had the largest urban native population in the United States. I don't know if people knew that, but you had tribes going from the South, Oklahoma, all the way to North Dakota. And so the socialization during that time, there would be groups of people all from different tribes all meeting, and Indian bars were a big thing for socializing. They were like people who were really poor, but they were all socializing in the bars, and you'd hear an Oklahoma accent, then you'd hear a northern accent, and people used to tease each other. And then you had the drums, the southern and northern drums that played differently at the powwows. So it was an Indian Renaissance of sorts. And really a very exciting time to be in Los Angeles. You could afford to live there at that time too, I might add.
All right, well, I'm gonna open this up to some of you in the audience. Oh, yeah, we have a question already, yeah?
Could you talk about the powwows and how they...
You want to use the mic?
Could you talk about the powwows and how they came to be?
Yeah, so a lot of the groups that was socializing were the powwows, and what was interesting about them, as I'd mentioned earlier, you had the southern and northern drums, and so the southern drum played slower and had a different kind of music than the northern, so it was kind of a fun competition dichotomy going like, oh, the southerners are doing their slow beat again, and all those northerners, they just beat the drum too fast. and the outfits were different, and you know, there was like almost a competition. And so you had this whole southern-northern dichotomy in LA at the time, which was really, I think, caused a lot of growth and made things very exciting during that period. You probably remember that a lot of the tribal religions were brought in. So it really was, like I said, a lot of writers were out there, and I write about a lot of this in my book, by the way, too.
So can you comment on any resonance or connections you see between the important issues during the AIM and American Indian Movement era and what's happening today in our country, where Native people are still fighting, and there's a lot going on for them with what's going on in our federal government? They're being hit particularly hard in ways that a lot of people don't understand.
Yes, I can.
Connections on them.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's almost as if some connections never die. They kind of sprouted as seeds at that time, and then they grew into trees, and this time is the only way to describe it. And so you had the extreme poverty, and I know a lot of people thought, oh, well, tribes have casinos, they're all wealthy. But that's only like a very, very tiny portion of tribes. The rest are still living. I knew people living on $600 a month in my tribal practice, and they just didn't have the money. So a lot of the stuff that happened then is happening today, and I think it's not only happening in Indian country, but it's happening everywhere. And I find that to be really interesting, because people had trouble getting health care, people had trouble getting food, and I'm seeing that's happening now. And I think now is a time more important than any that we remember that and try to get, you know, I don't want to be political, but let's get America back. I want people to have health care again and eat, and, you know, and I'm looking forward to that.
Hi, so I lived in San Francisco during the Wounded Knee incident. Can you talk a little bit about that? Because I remember they took over Alcatraz and it was a big battle. It was not that long ago. I mean, I think I was in my 20s when that happened. So can you talk a little bit about Wounded Knee?
Yes, I can. It was I do talk about it in the book, by the way, and I have a character that named a cell after himself. And he was an activist at Wounded Knee, and people were doing that. And what's interesting about it is you had Wounded Knee, and then you had Alcatraz, and I had a really good friend whose family, he's from that area, and they thought they were going to honestly be killed. It was pretty crazy, and they were on the news all over the world getting shot at, and they wanted to say, you know, we want our rights back. We want to be able to, you know, live again, live free, and we don't want to be oppressed. And so it got to be a very politically chaotic period, which everybody probably remembers with the Leonard Peltier thing, and he was accused of the killing of the FBI agents. He just recently, after 50 years in prison, got out, which is a shocker, because I don't think anybody thought he'd ever get out, that he was going to die there. But it was a very pivotal period in our history, because it really changed the whole dynamic for Native Americans. People then remembered how they didn't have this view that everybody died. You know, and at one time there was a view that we were relegated to commercials, and that was it. And they thought, wait a minute, there's natives all over the country, and, you know, they're telling us something. So I think it was a necessary and very pivotal time.
We have one question in the front, then in the back.
I would like for you to tell this that it wasn't until 1978 that Jimmy Carter passed the Freedom of Religions Act that allowed Native American people to practice their religions. That was huge.
Yes, I'd like to share with the Freedom of Religions Act. And back in the old days, people were afraid to practice tribal religions. They were afraid they'd get raided or arrested. And I knew people who were really frightened, and they had all of their ceremonies in the dark, hidden on the reservations. And they just said, we can't do these things, or we're gonna, you know, they're gonna come after us. And there were actual periods where sweat lodges were raided, and Native American church practitioners were attacked, and people that carried eagle feathers. So it was really important to recognize the Native religions, and I think it really, honestly, I'm gonna say it healed people, because they needed to have their spirituality back and not feel like they had to hide. And I might add that the boarding school era really hit a lot of people where they lost a lot of culture and they were pretty damaged, and it hit generations. So I think the American Indian Religious Freedom Act really opened doors again where people could be proud and happy again.
You talk about the boarding schools in your book?
Actually, I do have a scene because my character's mother was a boarding school survivor. And so I have a scene where the boarding school, I show the cruelty, the matrons, and how bad it was. And I might say this is a very strange legacy, but I come from 3 generations of boarding school members. My great-grandmother was the Carlisle, went to the first boarding school, whose philosophy was kill the Indian, save the man. And then I don't know how she survived that, and I wasn't alive when I was born. She wasn't alive, so I never got to meet her, but she went to that school. And then my mother went to one of the Catholic boarding schools, which I might add really made sure you could read, write, and do arithmetic, but there was also a certain strict cruelty that it was included with it that was very difficult on people in a sort of a racial type of I would say not recognizing Native religion. And then you finally had, my mother went to the Pipestone boarding school, which was a government operated kind of school where they did medical experiments on people. I do have that in the book, and they would give people, they call them vitamin shots, but your whole arm would swell up and it was almost like you got poisoned and you thought this is vitamin shot, and people would disappear. You didn't know if they were alive, they were just gone. So the boarding schools really are a scorched legacy that we don't talk about a lot, and they're finally being talked about, which I'm happy that they are, because we can't forget that.
Thanks for sharing everything so far. It's really fascinating. There's a really thriving generation of millennial writers and poets and screenwriters now. I'm curious to know who you find inspiration from. And then I also have a second part to the question. You mentioned that during the time that your book is set in, Los Angeles was sort of this hub of urban Indian population. Do you have any cities that you sort of keep a pulse on where you see a booming urban Indian population? I know Portland, Oregon was on the map for a while. I'm just curious to know your thoughts on that.
Okay, so the first question with the younger writers, who do I see and who inspires me? And I really enjoy, I've got to say, I love all of the crime suspense novels. And I've really gotten into Winter Count, the book about a Native man, and there's like no law enforcement on the reservation, and people are disappearing, and he's trying to figure out what's going on. David Hayden Weska, very good book. I was up all night reading it. So I've gotten inspiration from him. Marcy Rendon, who does a lot of the suspense novels. Rebekah Emerson, I like her books. So I read a lot of the young Native stuff, really enjoy it. I'm happy that Natives are out there writing, and it seems like, I'm really happy culture's not dying and people are still active. As far as urban Indian areas that have a lot of activity, I'm going to say Seattle has a huge missing and murdered Indigenous women group and a lot of activities going on. I think Los Angeles does. It's just sort of been hidden, but I know there's still a lot of Natives that are still living there that are very active. And they're everywhere you go, actually, in the big cities, there are like hidden hamlets of Natives, and they'll come out, you know. But they're like you said, they're in Portland, Seattle, Minneapolis, and unfortunately we don't have, even New York City has a Native community, believe it or not, and they're from the Canadian Six Nations groups, and they're quite active too.
I write for Indian Country Today, which is a national, we have a website and a broadcast channel. I live part-time in Los Angeles in Floyd Westerman's house in Marina Del Rey. He's been passed almost 20 years, but I'm friendly with his widow, Rosie, and everything is still as he left it. They used to have AIM meetings in the living room. All of his things are there, his artwork, the movie scripts. So we recently pulled everything together. The archive, it took a while. But we have an exhibit opening at the California Indian Museum up in Santa Rosa. It should be open this month. It's a select group, about 30 things. We have about 100. We're hoping to move it to a bigger location. But it's just fascinating going through those archives. I mean, every time I'm there, I open a drawer and it's just unbelievable. You know, he had such a career. I know you had the pictures of him there. And it was a real hub, you were saying, in Los Angeles. He had a lot of musicians there and the actors used to come to his house. Did you know him at all?
I adored Floyd Westerman. Yes, I did know him. I lived in Santa Monica, and I considered him to be the writer for the movement, the singer. And his songs could always bring a tear to your eye. And so I put those songs in the book, and I have some of his music in there. And the one, Custer Died for Your Sins, is in there. And the other one, and I love this one called Wounded Knee. And it just brings you to tears. And he sounded like Johnny Cash, Indian stuff, real deep voice. And he was in Dances with Wolves. And he was just a very inspirational man. That's why he was in my books. I actually find his singing brings a few tears to my eye. I knew his family, and he was a huge talent. And I hope his popularity never dies, because he captured an era, very much so, in Indian country.
Glad to hear it. We started an Instagram, some things that are going to be in the show. It's Floyd Westerman Official, if anybody wants to see. I mean, these are rare things from his own archives that nobody's seen. But yeah, great that you have them in the book.
Thank you.
I would like to get your opinion on reservation dogs.
I love the title, Res Dogs, because everybody, I don't know why, but that became a title for everything. And people were saying he's a res dog. And then I looked and I thought, oh my God, there's a movie called Res Dogs. Series, yes. And I had a dog, a pet that I called a res dog, because he had been abandoned out on the res and he was starving, and I adopted him. And he was like, he crawled to the house, very starved. And I kept thinking, I'm going to write a book called Res Dog about his experiences as an animal, because he used to run with the coyotes. I don't know how he didn't get killed, but when I would see him running with the coyotes. He was the only kind of bright red looking dog with all the coyotes. And I go, oh my God, there he is across the field. They didn't kill him, and he was hanging out with them. So I've got to say, Res Dogs really hit me, because that was going to be the title of one of my books. And I'm like, no, they already have it. But I do love, I think it's a really cute series, and I really I loved the Come and Get Your Love episode with, when they said, yeah, we used to sing that song in the 70s. And they said, you can't forget that song. And I thought that was really true. It's a very good, they just bring up a lot of cultural things that nobody knows about, like the deer woman with the deer hoofs, who went after the, like, you know, really nasty male guy that was like not doing nice things, and deer woman went after him. So yeah, there were a lot of interesting episodes. I enjoy it a lot. I'm glad to see a Native American series out there too. I'm really happy about that.
One more question.
Oh, I just wanted to say there is a book titled Res Dogs Don't Eat Beans. Writings from the Res. It's by one of our local Kalia Companion writers, Gordon Johnson, who lives on the Paula Reservation. So it's really good. It's a collection of short stories.
It sounds really good, and
Yeah.
like I'd
Heyday
like
Books.
to learn more about that.
Yeah, it's Heyday Books publishes it.
I will look it up.
Okay,
That's
just wanted you to
amazing.
know.
Thank you. You know, it's interesting. I've told people who don't understand, tribes are as diverse as Sweden and Italy. The tribes are all so different, and people think everybody's the same, but they're not. And I think I'm hoping with this book, I've got a huge hodgepodge or a menagerie of tribes, and I was hoping to bring that up so people would go, hey, wow, you have guys that are 6 feet tall with blondish hair who are enrolled members. So I tried to break stereotypes.
And it reminds me of one of the meals in your book. One of the characters eats, is it hoof stew?
Yes. So one of my characters, he was the narcissistic Heathcliff type guy who was wanted to be rich at any cost necessary, and we go into why he was like that, and we find out that he grew up on what he called slipper stew. And it was on the reservation where there was no food, and the only way they could survive was boiling hooves. And they called it slipper stew. So he constantly goes back to that poverty and never is going to be there again. And so he turns into quite a rogue. but we can kind of see, looking into him, why he became like that. I try to bring 3 dimensions to the people in the book.
And I know you didn't shy away from any of the difficult topics. You look at the trauma, but you look at it with humor as well. I mean, why was it important for you to, for instance, Cordy and her mother's relationship is a feature of Corey's story, and that's a difficult relationship because of what her mother went through. So why was it important for you to include those?
Well, I had to include the tragedy because I wanted to show, and I'm sure this is true with many groups, how humor can get you through the worst of times. When you look at Indian humor, and I'm sure some of my Jewish friends say it's Jewish humor too, where something really horrible happens and everybody kind of makes a joke out of it to survive it. So I have a scene in there where there's a beat up Indian car with a hole in the floor, and Cordy doesn't know how she's going to get home. And I'm just showing the extreme poverty and how people survived it and somehow laughed about it. And I tried to show that Native humor was really important for the survival of Indian country. And I think, you know, humor keeps you alive. Without it, you're really in trouble. You've got to have humor.
Cool. And you've been a tribal attorney for 30 years. And I congratulate you on now having your time to write this book. You know, that's a huge accomplishment. What I think is interesting about this book is you're writing about the 80s, and other people have written about Native America in the 80s, but you're looking back on it. So I feel like you probably have seen a lot of changes since then. And what are you hopeful about? What's coming up over the next 30, 40 years? How do you see Native lives sort of evolving?
Well, if I make it 40 years, I'm quite a bit older, so I may not be here, but if you get into that future, I'm hoping to see growth and success in our society, and I have different books up my sleeve as well. And I feel like I have messages to share with the world that are really important, and it's really important for me to share those heartfelt messages that have driven me to write these books. And things that I'm hoping, even if my book touches one person, and that one person reads the book and thinks, you know what, I can make it, I don't care how hard it is, I'm gonna make it. If I can touch one soul like that, that money isn't the root of everything, money doesn't make you happy, I will have accomplished what I'm looking to accomplish. And so that's what's important to me about my books.
Do you have any more questions in the audience? Yes, ma'am.
I wanted to ask you about you as a writer, and I wondered who inspired you originally when you were a child. Did your parents, or your grandma, or a teacher? How did you know you wanted to write?
Well, I forgot, and I was going to talk about that in today's talk, and it totally went over my head like a butterfly, and that was one of the important parts of the discussion. But my grandmother being a boarding school survivor at the Catholic schools, one of the things the nuns made sure you could do is read, write, and do arithmetic. And even though she wasn't formally educated, she could speak Latin, and her house was full of the classics, Dickens, Steinbeck. She knew all the Steinbeck novels inside and out. She knew all the Dickens stories, and she'd say, read this, you might like this. So I just started reading with her, and we spent weekends reading all of these classics together. And I loved them so much, and I went into different worlds and saw different lives and thought, you know what, I love literature. One day I want to share thoughts with the world, and so that's always been a dream of mine. So that's how it happened.
Anybody else before we wrap up here? Great, well then I encourage you to pick up, okay, sorry. I encourage you to pick up your copy of Native Brushstrokes, and Antoinette will be happy to sign it for you. And Antoinette, congratulations again. Do you have any final remarks before we wrap up?
Yeah, I just want to thank everybody who came today. I was told that there might be like 10 people, and so I'm really happy. And so I'm finding myself pleasantly surprised. There are so many of you, and so many people really interested in literature. And so it's been really nice to be able to share with you. Plus, I grew up in California, and coming back to my roots, and that's how I feel about California. It feels really good just being here, and the joie de vivre of the atmosphere here, of people being fun, and you know, there's just an atmosphere here unlike any in the world. So I love being here. Thank you.